Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I appreciate everybody coming today and being willing to spend a little bit of time here with me having a discussion about burnout and resiliency. I recognize that it's an additional hour of your time to come in and listen to some things that I have to say about this, and so I appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to do that, and hopefully there's some things that you didn't know that you'll be able to learn about, and some things that you can take from here and maybe apply outside of here. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Lacey Anthony, and I'm a behavioral health therapist. I've been working here at Crossing Rivers for just a little over a year now, but I've been doing mental health therapy for over 20. I also just want people to know that Matt Cram, who is our newest therapist, is here with us today as well. Just started a couple of weeks ago. So we're excited to have him here and hoping that he'll just add to our services that we have here for people, both staff and in our community as well. So I just put a few things down that we are going to be going over together today as we talk about burnout and resiliency. We want to spend a little bit of time just talking about how our brain responds to chronic stress and trauma. Talk about different kinds of states that we can experience, including not only burnout, but also including secondary trauma stress and compassion fatigue. Talk about signs and symptoms of both and how they kind of affect us professionally and personally. Talk a little bit about that word resiliency and compassion satisfaction and how mindfulness and self-compassion help us to develop those things. And then talk a little bit about some skills that you can start doing right away. Hopefully a couple of things that I have for you guys will be something that you think you can work with or you can at least try. I usually will say to people that I'm working with is we're just going to experiment with it a little bit. Most of the things I talk about are helpful. It doesn't mean they're going to help every single person. So there's just some things to try. I also have a sheet with some additional resources on it as well if you want to look into some more things. So that's kind of how we're going to spend the hour here together. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to ask. And I'll try to leave a little bit of time at the end too. So, why are we here today kind of talking about burnout? I want to recognize that part of this is because the leadership team here asked me to do this. I think they're recognizing that we've all been part of this shared experience with this pandemic and that it's affecting us. And through conversations they've had either with staff or with managers, directors, or through the staff satisfaction survey, they just really recognized that there were some things going on that they wanted to provide some education and some skills to help staff with. I'm hoping this is kind of a beginning and that as we go on we'll have more things that we can offer as well to the staff here so that you're feeling like you've got some places that you can go and some things that you can do to help manage this because we don't know for sure when this is going to end, right? So part of it obviously that we're here is because of the pandemic. Everybody kind of knows what we've been going through over the last year and a half. And again, don't know for sure when that's going to end, but it's not just that. We're living in this really kind of like incredible time where we've got a pandemic, we've got social justice situations going on out there, we've got political climate that has been ever escalating, and of course mass shootings that are going on. Whether we're directly involved in these things or just hearing about them, they have an impact on us. And so it's important for us to really recognize that impact and start talking about what that's doing to us or the people that we care about. So these are just, I wanted to throw together a few things for you guys, not a whole lot, but just mostly so that you know that you're not the only ones out there that are kind of struggling with some of this stuff. So this is a survey that was done through the Mental Health America website, and that's one of the resources. It's one of my favorites. They just have everything mental health that you can think of, including some screeners and some tests that you can take, as well as resources and tools for you to utilize for yourself. But they did this survey back in June through September of 2020 with about 1,200 healthcare workers. So you can kind of see there, obviously, a huge amount of people were just experiencing stress, but then you kind of break it down into anxiety, frustration, exhaustion, burnout, feeling overwhelmed, being emotionally exhausted, trouble with sleep, and trouble with physical exhaustion as well. From that same survey, one of the questions that they asked was, do you feel, and this is again to healthcare workers, do you feel like you have adequate emotional support? 39% of people said no, which is a huge number, but then you add in the 26% that said, I'm not sure. Right? So that probably means either they don't or they just don't have it consistently. So that's a big deal. I don't know how many of you in here are nurses, but this is what nurses responded to in the same question. 45% of them felt that they did not have adequate emotional support. That's a huge number. And then you add that 24% that still are not sure. So going through some really difficult, traumatic, emotional things, but not feeling like they had enough support to help them with that. This is a more recent one that was done through the Washington Post. It was the same, about the same number, about 1,000 healthcare workers. This one was conducted this year, so February 11th through March 7th of 2021. More than half felt that worry and stress related to COVID-19 has led to adverse impacts. 3 in 10 needed mental health care. I put this one up there to pay attention to the trouble with sleeping. It's just always a huge indicator if you're not sleeping well that something's not going right. Frequent headaches and stomach aches, so we know cortisol sort of collects in our heads and in our beds. So if we're having a lot of headaches and a lot of stomach aches, there's more stress going on in our life. And then increased alcohol and drug use, so that I want to just kind of numb this out and not think about this. I don't know where this was. Wisconsin probably would have been higher on alcohol and drug use because that's what we do here. We drink and sometimes we use drugs too. So this I took from an article that I read a couple of weeks ago, again in the Washington Post. But I thought it was interesting for us to look at this because we know that COVID-19 is just having a high cost to our healthcare workers. And I think it's important for us to really think about this because there's a shortage already of healthcare professionals. But due to this pandemic, 3 in 10 healthcare workers are actually thinking about leaving their profession. Like that's huge, right? They're just saying, I don't think I can do this anymore. More than half are burnt out. 6 in 10 say stress from the pandemic have harmed them mentally. Things like post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. And I don't have a number, but we know that more people in healthcare are committing suicide now because of the pandemic. And I think that that's just something important for us to think about. You know, that's where some people are headed towards, and especially if these things aren't being addressed. So again, it's a good reason that we're here. So why is this really happening? So what we know is that when we're exposed to chronic crisis, our brain starts to process information differently. So our sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response, starts to get overloaded. It starts to just get activated. It's going all the time. Now it's a good thing we have fight or flight, our freeze response. That helps keep us safe, helps keep us out of danger, helps us to learn about things that we want to avoid or that we don't want to be involved in. But after a while, when we're exposed to it over and over, it starts to have a real impact on us emotionally and physically. Also, there's a suppression of that parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the part that helps us rejuvenate, the part that helps us refuel, the part of our thinking brain that tells us everything's okay right now, that gets suppressed. And so we're not getting that good grounding. We're not being able to thrive in these situations when there's chronic crisis all the time. This is just a little diagram that I kind of liked because it sort of, to me, is exactly what's going on. And when we're not exposed to chronic crisis, all of these things are working well together. Yes, we still have that fight or flight, but it's not activated, it's not red, it's not lit up all the time. We can communicate effectively between that part of our brain, our memory and emotion part of our brain, and then that thinking part of our brain. And in normal times that works well together, but in these kinds of situations, our amygdala is lit up and we're acting out of crisis all the time. Everything seems like it's a threat, and we're responding more impulsively. more quickly. We're jumping, we're irritable. We can't think about things in a different way. We're unable to kind of decide things. Is this a crisis? Is it not a real crisis? And we end up kind of moving into something that we would call survival brain, or I've heard it referred to as reptilian brain, because we're really just operating out of survival, kind of like reptiles do. So this chronic, seemingly never-ending state of crisis and trauma leads to a heightened sense of threat that switches our brain from thinking to survival mode. When we experience trauma like a pandemic, the survival brain grows brighter, reacting impulsively for self-preservation. Over time, our survivor brain becomes really strong due to the frequent use. We become hyper-vigilant and everything is a threat. And our thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex part, is less able to oversee physical and emotional regulation. Our impulse control goes down, our insight is impaired. It's hard for us to make a determination, that just happened to me, but I'm okay. That just kind of goes away. We don't have that same insight. Our empathy goes down, and it's hard for us to think critically. So that's kind of, where a lot of people, especially in healthcare, are if you've been exposed to crisis kind of over and over again. Or even if you haven't been, but you're working in healthcare with other people that have been. Or if you're not even working in healthcare and you're just trying to figure out from day to day how to manage this stuff. I remember when this first all happened and we had to be so careful about not touching each other, and I was watching an old movie and all these people went up and started hugging each other and I was like, don't touch, right? My amygdala was kicked in, and I thought there was a threat there, even though there really wasn't a threat going on. So that's where we kind of come into what are sort of these common experiences when we're in this chronic stress. So burnout, secondary trauma, and compassion fatigue. There's lots of ways to describe this stuff, but these were the ones that I kind of kept coming back to, and that I think for us as healthcare providers, whether you're in direct patient care or not, sort of resonated the most with what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing for people. So what does burnout really mean? Burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that's caused by long-term involvement in an emotionally demanding situation. So day in and day out, you're being asked to do more with less. Every day you keep the ground running, there's always something going on, and you start to feel like, you can't see the value in your job anymore. It just doesn't seem to make sense why I'm coming in every day. Nobody seems to care. Never seem to get anything done. I go from one fire to another fire. Persons that are experiencing burnout become fatigued or cynical about their jobs, and after a while it tends to get worse. So the early signs, you're going to feel you're going to get sick more often, you're going to experience more of that headache and that fatigue. Oops. Zach?
Yes.
Oh, there it goes.
You got it.
All right, let's wiggle it a little bit. You're gonna feel more moody. You're probably going to feel like you have a reduced sense of accomplishment.
Stand up again, Zach.
Yeah.
Zach, hold it for. Look at that! Twice in a row!
Like you're gonna have that reduced sense of accomplishment, and you're going to notice more interpersonal conflicts, right? So this could be at home that you're coming here and you're doing fine at work, but you get home and you're fighting with your spouse more, you're just yelling at your kids more. But it could be at work too. Like if I have to talk to that Kim McKevin one more time, I think I'm going to lose it because she's just the worst. I just can't do with her anymore, right? It's that stuff. We just feel like we can't get along with people at work. Or we talk about, well, if that department would just get it together, then the rest of us wouldn't have to deal with this stuff. So it's that kind of stuff that you're, again, early signs. If it's left untreated, you're going to have more of those somatic complaints. You're going to start to withdraw more socially. I don't want to deal with people anymore. I hear that a lot. I just can't stand people. And so we start to withdraw, we start to isolate. We end up sort of feeling depersonalized, like we're just kind of going through the motions, that cynical, exhaustion, irritability, low energy. And then the last one, that feeling unappreciated and overwhelmed, that us versus them kind of thing. And I think I've seen this a lot when it comes to the pandemic and probably with healthcare a little bit more. Just some things I've been seeing is we work so hard to take care of people, and then we see people in Walmart without their masks, or we see people gathered in large, gatherings, and so we start to feel that us versus them. Or if it's more just internal, it's those leaders sitting over there in their fancy suite, right? They don't know what we're going through on the front lines. It's that kind of us versus them sort of mentality. So secondary trauma stress is a little bit different, although these two tend to kind of go together, especially in healthcare. So the secondary trauma stress is really the impact of being exposed to difficult or disturbing traumatic images or stories of suffering from others, and how that might impact us as individuals. So it's that idea of, if you're working in direct patient care and you see somebody, coming in and they're very sick and they can't have their family with them, and we start to imagine, what would that be like for me? Or they have to be intubated, am I saying that right? Right? And what would that be like for me to have to go through something like that? So we're being exposed to this really horrific stuff or these really difficult situations with people, either watching it, witnessing it, or hearing about it, and we start to imagine that happening to us. So emotional and psychological effects experienced through indirect exposures to the detailed traumatic experiences of others. So secondary trauma stress symptoms includes that hypervigilance. Remember, again, if we're dealing with this on an ongoing basis and our survival brain is kicked on, we're always wondering what bad thing is going to happen next. What's the next thing that we're going to have to deal with? What's the next story we're going to have to hear? What's the next thing we're going to have to do with a patient? We start to kind of want to avoid things like that. If we don't want to talk with people, we become a little bit shorter. We become sort of isolated. Maybe we start re-experiencing or having intrusive memories of the last patient that we saw, the last 10 patients that we saw. We see that change in mood. We have trouble concentrating. We feel exhausted, and then we start to get sick. A little blurb here about secondary trauma stress and PTSD. These two things are close, but a little bit different. So PTSD is mental health conditions that's triggered by a terrifying event. I always say where my life is in danger or I saw somebody's life in danger. So you're talking car accidents, you're talking, being robbed or being mugged. You're talking maybe severe weather or something like that, right? Where your life was in danger or you were directly involved with somebody else's life being in danger. It's symptoms of that are flashbacks, nightmares, severe anxiety, as well as this kind of uncontrollable thoughts about the event. So secondary trauma stress tends to be where we're kind of witnessing it secondhand. They've come here, right, because of some kind of injury or illness, or we're hearing about it, where PTSD is more triggered by we were there and we saw it and we witnessed it. Now, I think that you can make an argument that given the situation that we're in right now, that you could develop either one of these. I think especially since, with COVID-19, we're kind of like putting ourselves in harm's way. And so we're witnessing people being affected by this, but we're also putting ourselves in that situation. So it's a lot easier to imagine what that would be like, and some people have gotten sick from that direct exposure to other people. So I think either way, if you're experiencing these kinds of things, particularly if it's affecting your sleep and you're having a lot of intrusive memories or you're having a lot of flashbacks, a lot of nightmares, that's a sign to be concerned and probably that you want to talk to somebody about that kind of stuff. So a counselor like me or use our EAP or something like that. So then we go to compassion fatigue, and compassion fatigue is the profound emotional and physical exhaustion that helping professionals and caregivers can develop over the course of their career as helpers. It's a gradual erosion of all things that keep us connected to others in our caregiver role, our empathy, our hope, and of course our compassion, not only for others, but for ourselves. So when I think about compassion fatigue, it's definitely over time kind of thing. If you're new to healthcare, this isn't something that's going to happen within 3 days of you kind of starting your career here, but it's going to be something that is going to happen kind of over time. And one day, a lot of people, kind of experience it where one day they just can't do it anymore. They've been working for a long time in this field, and then just one day they just are exhausted and they just can't possibly go into another patient room. They can't possibly talk with another client about kind of what's been going on for them. They just can't deal with it anymore. So it's gradual, but at the same time can come on quickly for some people. So this is one of my favorites. After listening to our owner drone on for hours, Ginger suddenly realized she was not cut out to be an emotional support dog after all. Poor Ginger. But that's kind of how I think about this, right? We go into this profession and we do it for a long time, and then one day, just maybe this isn't for me. We go back to that idea of 3 out of 10 healthcare professionals are thinking about leaving the profession because of the pandemic. I think we're seeing more of this compassion fatigue, where if there hadn't been a pandemic, they might never ever have that thought. But because they're being taxed so much, and because there's so much going on, maybe I'm just not cut out for this anymore. So this is one theory of how compassion fatigue sort of develops. There's burnout, because we're being asked to do more and more, high levels of stress, high levels of turnover, those kinds of things. We're experiencing all this secondary trauma stress by hearing about all these things, seeing people come in with these illnesses, hearing stories from family members, and those two things together sort of develop into this compassion fatigue. So signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue include, I sort of broke this down, physical, you're going to feel exhausted, you're going to have sleep problems, headaches, muscle tension, more illnesses. Behaviorally, you might be using more alcohol and drugs, you're going to feel more anger, more irritability, that exaggerated sense of responsibility, this sort of feeling, I can't possibly take a day off. There's too many things going on, my team members need me too much, Sometimes when people get into trouble with making friends with their patients on Facebook, don't do that. That never turns out well, right? But we have that, I have to be available for people. Forgetfulness, trouble making decisions. Remember, our prefrontal cortex is shut off and we're on crisis mode, we're in survival brain, and so it's hard for us to make decisions, and we're hard for us to remember things, trouble with intimacy, and trouble separating that professional and personal life. And then psychologically, you can have one or all of these things, guilt, depression, loss of hope, cynicism, dread about coming into work, that hypervigilance. You may experience a spiritual crisis if you're a spiritual person and maybe all of a sudden, there is no God kind of thing. Why would God let these terrible things happen? And then that self-criticism, and that's a big one, I think, especially in caregivers. We're really good at putting ourselves down. We say things to ourselves that we wouldn't say to our worst enemy. We are just really, really good at beating ourselves up. And so that just gets worse with compassion fatigue because we think we're supposed to care all the time. So this slide I put up here because I think it sort of encapsulates this well, and because it helps me remember to ask everybody this question. So when you think about burnout, it stems from this dissatisfaction of the work environment, where compassion fatigue is stemming from this absorbing of the suffering of your clients. So my question that I have for you guys, just to think about for a few seconds, is, do you love your job? Deep down here in your heart, I know we all have days, right? But do you love your job? So if the answer is no, then we tend to look more at your burnt out. Not always, but we tend to look at that, like my job just isn't giving me any kind of satisfaction anymore. I just don't get anything from it. I don't love it. I don't want to be here. It tends to be more of that burnout. If the answer is yes, but you're still experiencing all this stuff, then it's probably more that compassion fatigue. Now we can address both of them with some of the things that we're going to talk about, and with working with people on how to manage this stuff. But for most people, when you're experiencing burnout, they tend to think in terms of leaving that job or maybe getting a different career. Now, it doesn't always work for everybody, because if you've got 3 years left to work, who wants to leave and start a new job, right? Or if you live in a small town, there's just no other jobs out there, right? So it's not that we can't cope with burnout. We can certainly do that, but a lot of people get relief from maybe thinking about changing their job or looking into a different career. So what does all of this mean, right? We talked about where we're at. We're talking about, most of us are experiencing something in this area, whether it's burnout, whether it's secondary trauma stress, whether it's this compassion fatigue, whether we're just feeling more stressed out, those kinds of things. So what do we do with that? I think the first thing is acknowledging whether we're struggling or not. And that for those of us in helping professions, it's that early recognition and working on self-care, both in and out of the workplace, to create resilience and wellness. It's crucial for us to replenish ourselves. Remember that parasympathetic nervous system. It's crucial for us to start engaging that more by doing things that take care of ourselves so that we can refill the tank instead of just going on crisis mode all the time. But what gets in the way, right? So most of us here can think about this in an intellectual level, but it doesn't always lead to us taking better care of ourselves, right? Most of us focus on others at the expense of our own well-being. I put this little tag in here of the hero complex to help me remember, because I think it's something for us to really think about in healthcare. So in particular, it's not just healthcare, I think it's any kind of essential worker right now in this pandemic, who are often called heroes. And I think it's a wonderful way for the public to thank us for what we do. But in some ways, it can set some of us up, too, to think that because we're heroes, this can't or shouldn't affect us, right? I mean, heroes don't take a day off work. Heroes don't get sick. Heroes don't struggle emotionally. Heroes don't have anxiety, all of those things, right? I should be able to manage this. I should be able to do this. So I'm not putting people down for calling us heroes. I think that makes us feel good. And at the same time, we have to remember that we're human beings as well. We believe that focusing on personal needs is selfish and indulgent. I hear this all the time when I work with people that are in caring professions, because we're so built to take care of other people that we feel like we're being selfish if we try to take care of ourselves. And we also tend to believe that if we struggle, it's because we're not trying hard enough or we're not strong enough. Cue Kelly Clarkson, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This is kind of the belief that we have, or what we've told ourselves, or what others maybe feel about us, right? But the fact is that what doesn't kill you can leave you in a paraplegic state. And by that, what I mean is that it can affect you and make it difficult for you to be able to do the things that you want to be doing in your life. So the reality is that untreated, the more untreated our trauma is, the more susceptible we are to compassion fatigue, and left untreated, the easier it is for us to develop some kind of a serious mental health thing. So I like to talk about trauma a little bit because I think that it's important for us to understand what it means when we don't take care of our trauma. So for those of us that are doing, healthcare work where you're working with patients, we often talk about taking care of ourselves, right? And especially if they've got something that we can see. So if you've got some kind of a break, your leg is broken, or you've got some kind of a wound or something like that, we talk about the importance of taking care of ourselves. And this is very true. So I have this little burn, it's actually a burn on my finger here. And when I first burnt my hand, I had to spend a lot of time tending to this wound. I had to clean it, and I had to put Neosporin on it, like my mom always tells me to do, wrap it up in a Band-Aid, and I have to be careful when I would wash my hands, because otherwise it would knock the scab off. And it took a lot of time to get it to the point where it's not, right? And I had to really pay attention to it. And we're good at that. We think about that a lot, and we can take good care of ourselves. If I hadn't done that, it might have gotten infected. It might have affected my ability to use my thumb. Who knows what might have happened if I hadn't done that. So this kind of trauma that we're talking about now is the same thing that happens inside of our heads. So if you think about it like a wound, inside of your head. Maybe you can't see it, but if we don't do something with it, if we don't take time, if we don't take care of it, if we don't tend to it, it gets worse, it gets bigger, it can get infected in a way, and it can affect our way of being able to deal with not only our lives professionally, but personally too. It doesn't just go away because we can't see it. So, for those of you that don't know Sigmund Freud, he's coined as being the father of psychotherapy. He's really kind of a nut job. He just really is. He's the guy that said that all boys want to sleep with their moms. I mean, he's just weird. He's just a weird guy. But what I would give him is this quote, because I 100% believe in this. Unexpressed emotions will never die. They're buried alive and will come forth in uglier ways. So when I talk with my patients about this, a metaphor that I use with them is, have you ever tried to hold an inflated ball underwater like a basketball, right? So you're in a pool and you're trying to hold this ball underwater. And it's hard. You can do it, right? You can hold it there, but it's difficult. And the longer you do it, the harder it gets. Your arms start to shake, it starts to get slippery, right? We start to have to put more energy and really focus on it and can't have as much fun as we want to. And inevitably what usually happens, ball comes up, we get it in the face, or if we're lucky, one of our friends' face, right? Boom, there it is. That's what Sigmund is talking about here. We can try to push these things under, we can try to ignore them, but that only leaves our arms tired and usually with a smack in the face or a smack in the face of something that we care about. So what we want to do instead is try to start developing and practicing good self-care so that we can start to heal those traumas that we've been exposed to on a regular basis. So we want to move from this compassion fatigue to compassion satisfaction. So for those of you that answered yes to the question, do I love my job? This is why we do it, right? It's that satisfaction that we feel when we do something well. When we take care of a patient, when we see a patient doing well. I remember when that patient was here for all those weeks and we all gathered at the door when she left, that was an awesome feeling, right? And I wasn't even involved in her care, but I felt good, And so that's why we do that, and that's what we want to try to get more of. Higher levels of compassion satisfactions are related to our ability to be effective helpers. So things like creating hope and healing for our patients. If you maybe aren't involved in direct patient care, it's working for your organization and their missions. It's working with your teammates. It's supervising and directing patient outcomes, developing those high levels of patient satisfaction. It's the good stuff that keeps us going. So if we take that theory from earlier and talk about the development of compassion fatigue, this is one of the things that we can do to help mitigate compassion fatigue, right? It's developing more of that compassion satisfaction. So one of the ways that we do that is by building resiliency. And so what is resilience? So resilience is that thing. Some people are born, just through doing this work as long as I've been doing it. I think there are some people that are just born maybe a little bit more resilient than other people. You're born and raised in the same family and all of your other siblings, go on to, beat their kids just like Dad did, but you don't. I don't know why. It's just something about you that caused you to be more resilient, to be able to bounce back from that a little bit easier. The good news is, though, is we can all build resiliency. We all have the capacity to do that, to be able to learn from our experiences, to be able to develop knowledge and insight so that going forward we can make those good decisions for ourselves. But one of the ways that we have to do that is that we have to be giving back to ourselves. So resiliency not only helps repair our compassion satisfaction during times of high stress and trauma, but also helps us to maintain high levels of compassion satisfaction on a daily basis. So when we're resilient and we're able to learn from things and we're feeling good about, our ability to notice, if we need to be refueling our tank, it makes us feel better about the jobs that we're doing. So what does resilience look like? So people that are more resilient tend to be able to self-calm. They're the people that everybody goes to in a crisis because they know that they're going to be calm. They're the kind of that person that just seems like nothing gets them too excited. They exercise self-care, so the stuff that we're talking about here, these are the people that are talking about the stuff that they do for themselves on a regular basis. Like they're not afraid to just take good care of themselves. They can talk about their emotions. They're not afraid to tell people about how they're feeling or how something affected them. They're non-judgmental of themselves primarily and other people, but I think for ourselves, this idea of not judging ourselves, of not thinking that we have to be perfect, not thinking we have to be the hero. They're optimistic, they're hopeful, and they have a good support system around them. So how do we do this? Resiliency is about learning to recognize emotional and physical fatigue and moving quickly to fill it back up before we hit the empty point. If you remember that little slide on compassion fatigue, getting down to the empty. It involves commitment and energy to making real life changes and developing a self-care practice. We must recognize our burnout, our secondary trauma, our compassion fatigue symptoms, and then plan to manage these effectively and sort of practice what we preach. So we're really good at telling other people to take care of themselves. We're really good at telling our patients to take it easy. You just had surgery, you can't be lifting that, you can't be doing this. Really good at telling our colleagues, you should take a vacation, We're really good at telling our parents, it's okay, I'll take care of this for you, right? But we don't often apply that to ourselves. So it's about building that self-care practice so that we start doing that on a more regular basis. So one of the ways that I think is important for us to be able to develop this self-care practice is to figure out where we're at with it. So on your resource page, there's this link to this self-assessment tool for compassion fatigue. So it's just a way of doing kind of a quick assessment. There's not that many questions on it, just to kind of see where you're at. Are you doing okay, or are you not doing okay? And what I like about this one is it talks about compassion fatigue, secondary trauma stress, and burnout. So you get a good feeling for where you're at with all of those. And then what we want to do is develop a warning scale. So this is about once we kind of learn what our symptoms are of compassion fatigue or what things end up happening when we're getting more burnt out, we can develop a way to be able to track that so that we can kind of know if this shows up, this is what's going on for me. And we can develop a list of tools that we can use then to get us back down to where we're feeling like we're managing things more effectively. So first thing would be to do is just to identify what your compassion fatigue symptoms are, your burnout symptoms are, your secondary secondary trauma stress symptoms are, and then rate them, 10 being the worst, so the worst and 1 being the best. And then to be able to identify kind of that red zone, that 7, 8, 9, 10 red zone, thinking from a behavioral. So the example of, I know I'm at an 8 when I start to ignore phone calls, emails, or when I think about calling in sick every day, right? I'm moving towards a 7 when I turn down my best friend's offer to go to the movies or when I stop exercising. So it's that idea of, what am I doing? What am I feeling? What emotions am I having when I'm getting into that red zone? So that when those things show up, I've got a better chance of catching it before I'm depleted and I can add some things back into it. So just quickly, the things when you're doing this to focus on is physically. Our bodies tell the story first. So if you're having chronic headaches and you're just taking, ibuprofen every day to get rid of it, stopping and taking a moment to say, well, what does this mean? What's really maybe going on for me? I've got this chronic back pain, what's happening for me, that's going on. Typically we tend to either ignore things or we medicate it, but really our body's trying to tell us something and we want to honor that. Behaviorally, are we fighting with people more? Are we watching more TV? Are we using more alcohol? Are we binge eating? We all can avoid things, and I'm a fan of avoiding things every once in a while too. It's not about that we can't ever avoid things. It's when we're doing it at the expense of what we'd rather be doing. I always talk with my patients about what are our values and what are behaviors that are in line with our values. And if I'm not doing those things, if I'm too burnt out to go to the park, which is something that I really want to be doing because, I'm too tired and I just want to sleep all the time, something's going on with me there. And then emotionally, what shows up with you, depression, anxiety, are you feeling just emotionally exhausted or resentful about the demands that are being put on you? If you're having a hard time figuring this out, this is another great assessment tool. It's just about where are you at right now. It's on that resource, so it just asks you physically what's going on with you right now, emotionally what's going on with you right now, what behaviors are you engaging in. So again, just another tool to help you kind of make this determination. Once you get that together, then what I say is just pick out the top 3 things that show up the most for you when you're feeling burnt out or you're experiencing compassion fatigue. So for example, and this is me, so I'll just, transparency, this is what happens to me, right? If I'm eating more sugar, if I'm not exercising and I'm watching more TV, right? I can guarantee that if I'm feeling stressed out or burnt out, those things are going to show up for me every single time. It's going to start with the eating sugar. And that just makes me then become more aware when I'm grabbing that piece of chocolate. I can go, what's going on in my life right now? Do I just really want a piece of chocolate or am I feeling more stressed? Right? Why am I just sitting here watching what's the one my husband watches, Ice Fisherman something? Like, I don't want to watch this, but I'm just zoned out. Right? I'm just avoiding these other things. Something's going on with me. It's your early warning system. So true self-care is not about salt baths and chocolate cake. It's making a choice, not that I'm saying that's bad, but it's making a choice to build a life that you don't need to regularly escape from. Right? So it's about giving back while you're giving. So I'm not going to go over all of these. These are just some things that you can think about in terms of compassion, fatigue, resiliency, things that people that are doing well at managing their compassion fatigue do on a regular basis. I did highlight the self-care toolbox because in the last few minutes that we have, I do want to talk about a couple of things that I like to work with people on and that research shows are sort of like the groundwork for good self-care. But these are some other things that you can think about. And I think, again, this whole idea around making sure that each day you're trying to do something good for yourself. Exercising, eating well, taking breaks, drinking enough water, just the things that we tell our patients to do all the time. There's things that work for us as well. So, a couple of things that I think are super important for everybody to work on in terms of self-care. So whenever I look at this, I always just think to myself, I just want to be the dog, right? Because the dog is just looking at the trees and the sun, probably smelling the air, listening to the sounds, and here we are with all this stuff in our head, right? So when we think about mindfulness, I know sometimes it gets a little bit of a bad rap, right? Because everybody talks about mindfulness now. But mindfulness doesn't have to be this big thing. You don't have to meditate for an hour every day in order to be able to practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is just exactly what this dog is doing. It's just about being aware about what's going on in the here and now. John Kabat-Zinn is sort of the guru guy of mindfulness, and he says it's an awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. It's something we all have inside of us. We don't have to conjure it up. We just have to learn to access it. I think part of why mindfulness is difficult for people is because we're not programmed to do it and because it's not an immediate fix. We are a society of immediate gratification. When we can get on our phones and find out anything, in a split second, mindfulness, doesn't work that way. It's a practice. But the more often you do it, the better you get at it. And the better it works for you in order to be able to manage chronic stress and chronic crises. So what does science say? I always like to throw in some science because as therapy and psychology has advanced, we're getting more and more research that says these aren't things that we just like to talk about that feel good. There's actually proof. There's actually research out there that says these things actually work. So scientists find that practicing mindfulness is associated with changing the structure and function of brain. So there's MRIs out there that they did with a bunch of people before they did an 8-week mindfulness stress reduction course, that when they did it before and then they did it after the 8 weeks course, that it changed the brain structure, the way the brain lit up. So they actually made an impact doing this. It changes how we respond to stress, it enhances our performance, and it gains insight and awareness into our thoughts, feelings, and actions. There's also another one, and I should get better at putting these down, but reading another one where if you take people that are in sports and you have them visualize the event they're going to do prior to it, it lights up the same muscles in your body as when you're actually running the event. Right? So when you're mindfully going through your track event that you're going to do, and they wire you up, and then they wire you up when you do it, the same muscles twitch. Right? That's how powerful our mind is. Mindfulness also helps us reduce ruminating, helps us boost our working memories, increase focus, reduces our emotional reactivity, improves relationship satisfaction, and increases empathy and compassion. So, how do you practice mindfulness? Again, you don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to meditate. You don't have to buy any equipment. We can just do a mindfulness exercise right here. So, if you guys are open and you're willing, I would just have you kind of get comfortable in your seat. You don't have to shut your eyes if you don't want to. It's totally up to you. But you can just practice being right here in this room right now by first just noticing your breath, noticing how it feels when you breathe in and how it feels when you breathe out. Notice it in your body. Notice your feet just on the floor right here. Maybe push them down into the floor a little bit. And just really get a feel for that underneath your feet, right? Gravity pulling you down. Notice your backside in your chair. Just really become aware of how it feels when you're sitting there in your chair. If you have your eyes open, just look around the room and notice a couple of things here in the room. Notice that we're having this conversation together. Notice anything that you might hear as you're in the room, as you're listening. Anything that you can smell. And then notice any thoughts that might come up for you right now. Anything that's pulling you away from the room. Whether this is a thought about what we're doing right now, or if it's about lunch that you had or dinner you have to make tonight. Just notice how those thoughts kind of pull at you. Right? Notice any emotions that you might feel, as you're here. Like, does this make you feel anxious? Does it make you feel, scared? Right? Are there any physical sensations that might be distracting you? And then just bring your attention back to your breath, and to your feet, and to your backside. So that's mindfulness. It's really just about being present in the moment and noticing it, and then noticing when our thoughts pull us away. We can't control our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. If I told you, all right, now don't think about a white bear, whatever you do, I don't want you to think about a white bear. No matter what else comes into your mind, don't think about a white bear. What are you going to do? You're going to think about a white bear because I keep talking about a white bear, right? We can't control that, but we can control what we do. We can control what we focus on, what we choose to focus on. Even if those thoughts keep coming back, even if the bear pops back in your mind, you can notice that and pull your attention back to the moment. So that's mindfulness. On that resource guide sheet, I gave you a link to mindfulness.org, which has, I think there's 3 or 4 other simple mindfulness activities you can do. It also happens to be a great resource. Though be careful, they ask you to subscribe all the time, just click no. Okay? But lots of great articles if you're interested in mindfulness. Okay? And then I wanted to talk a little bit about self-compassion. Partly because there's a ton of research again that shows that when we can get really good at being compassionate with ourselves, we can develop resiliency. and compassion and satisfaction that we all want to have. So self-compassion involves acknowledging your own suffering and responding kindly. In other words, treating yourself with the same warmth, caring, and kindness that you extend to someone that you love. There's been tons of research that shows the benefits of self-compassion for our mental health and resiliency. It helps us manage stress and anxiety, helps us to manage failures and setbacks, helps us process grief and loss, and helps us deal with emotional and physical pain. So this is all about acknowledging that we're struggling and that we're suffering. So why do we need self-compassion? I think more so than maybe somebody else, that isn't in the healthcare field or in a helping profession. Most of people that are helpers identify closely with that profession. And so I want you to know that compassion fatigue isn't a character flaw, and it has nothing to do with not having what it takes. And that understanding this pain is uncomfortable, right? Nobody likes to feel pain. Nobody comes to my office and says, I want to have more anxiety, Lacey, or I want to be stressed out more. But we know that it's going to show up and that it's normal, even though it's uncomfortable. And that caring for our physical and emotional needs is imperative if we're going to continue to keep doing what we're doing. So there's a self-compassion assessment that you can take if you want to. This is Dr. Russ Harris. These are his sort of 6 elements of self-compassion. We're going to focus on the first 2, acknowledging pain and acting with kindness. Again, I always like to pull it back to some research because I think it's important that this is tied to, we know that this works when we do it well, right? So Dr. Fredrickson has discovered that there is a synchronicity of neurochemistry when 2 people are together. So when we're connected with another person, we sync up with that individual. And we have this shared experience that's a moment of love or a state of safetyness, which releases oxytocin. Right? And oxytocin is this feel-good kind of hormone. It's associated with childbirth, right? But it also is associated with empathy, trust, and relationship building. So when we have a connection with another person, that oxytocin is being released. And it's sort of the antidote to cortisol, which is our stress hormone. Right? And so it generates this feeling of safety, and it's powerful in helping us support and grow. Right? So I've got 2 exercises, and I put them together because I think they go so well together. The other one is by a resiliency expert, Linda Graham, who talks about this exercise in self-compassion to help shift our brain. So, like I said before, we can't get rid of painful thoughts, emotions, and feelings, but we can be aware of them and shift our brain towards things that move us in the direction that we want to be going instead of getting caught up in all of that, right? So you've got both of these exercises with you. We're going to go through it together as a group. And then you'll have them if you want to hopefully continue to do this outside of here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, kind of like we did just a few minutes ago when we did the mindfulness stuff, is just get comfortable in your chair. And this time, if you want to shut your eyes or just lower your gaze, you can do that. Right? And just take your hands and kind of, at first, you might want to put your papers down. Just kind of put your hands, just kind of rest them in your lap. And now what I want you to do is just take your hand, or it can be both of them if you want, and just place it over your heart. And I want you to breathe in gently, softly, into your heart center. Experience sort of a ease or safety or goodness with your hand there over your heart. And then I want you to bring to mind a moment, just a moment where you felt safe or loved or cherished by another human being. So just one interaction, not the whole relationship, but just a moment where you felt connected to somebody in a safe, loving, kind way. This could be with a partner or a child a friend or a teacher, maybe a spiritual person in your life. If you're having trouble finding that person, maybe think back to when you were a kid and somebody provided that for you. If you're really still struggling with that, think about, a pet, something like that that can bring about that connection in that moment. Just allow that feeling to kind of wash through your body. Notice any thoughts or feelings that arise as you recall this moment of being cared for and loved. And notice any kind of physical sensations, whether you're feeling warmth or coolness, heaviness or lightness, a sense of calm or of activation. With your hand still on your heart, now I want you to think about a situation in your life that's been difficult, something that might be causing you stress. And as you call this situation to your mind, just see if you can actually really feel the stress or emotional discomfort in your body. Notice any surge of difficult emotion, anxiety, anger, shame, guilt. And then bring your attention back to your hand on your heart. And that feeling of being cared for, being loved, and being cherished. And then empathize with your own experience. Just recognize the suffering. You can say to yourself, this is hard. This is upsetting. This is painful. Something that you might say to somebody else that was sharing this difficult situation with you. And now, in your head, I want you to repeat these next sentences. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I accept this moment exactly as it is. May I accept myself exactly as I am in this moment. And may I give myself all the compassion that I need. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes, lift your gaze, just come back to the room here. So this type of self-compassion exercise is meant to bring yourself into this place that we often give to others, where we can be empathetic, we can recognize the suffering and pain that we're having. We can just be there, make room for it, allow it to happen, and give ourselves kind words. It's something I often will ask people to do whenever they're experiencing a difficult emotion or when you just feel like you need that boost. And you can do it for as little time or as long time as you want to, whatever works for you in that situation. So it often comes back to this, right? That's what we're doing. We're just holding ourselves gently, that same way, trying to comfort ourselves in these times of difficulty. So that's what I have for you today. If anybody has any questions, I know we're kind of out of time, but I'm more than willing to answer them now, or if you want to get a hold of me later, you can always email me or give me a call. Happy to talk more with people about this.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.